Hello everyone and welcome to my next video. Thank you for all the feedback that you gave me. Apologies for some of the aspects of the last video, particularly the ratio and the watermark. I'm slowly working on getting the new software and a new monitor that actually records in widescreen. So yeah, let's go on to the topic for this video. Endgame for Guild Wars 2. So what is endgame? Endgame is once you reach level 80 and you finish your personal story, what is there next to do in the game? So this is just a spoiler alert. I'm sure most of you have done this already, but once you kill the Elder Dragon, well, you say kill, you defeat the Elder Dragon Zaitan, well, what's next for you in the game? Okay, so, well, there is other things for you to do. There are dungeons, there are several dungeons which you can do. However, they're not exactly that. They don't lead on from the personal story. You can start doing dungeons at a lower level, although it's not recommended, and very rarely do people take a lower than level 80 person in a dungeon. And one of the interesting things is, if you compare it to Guild Wars 1, what happened when one of the later updates, they brought in hard mode. And hard mode was a very successful way of getting people to go back. It was greater rewards, it was extremely difficult content at low levels, particularly the lower missions where you'd only have a 4-man party and you were taking on very, very difficult mobs, and particularly in the early Ascalon missions, and it was a challenge. But what does Guild Wars 2 have? Well, they do have map completion. Go around, do all the vistas, the points of interest, the hearts. But is that the same as Guild Wars 1? I mean, in Guild Wars 1 you had to skim all the map to get the map completion. You had to complete all the missions, but this was a bit different. Guild Wars 2, you can also go for a legendary weapon. I mean, that's why I spent a lot of my time after defeating Zaitan. I spent a lot of time getting my legendary. That's what I wanted to do. It was the next level. You've now also got armor, ascended armor, potentially legendary armor coming into the game. Is that going to be the end game? But again, that's just cosmetic. That's not actually playing the game. If you look at Guild Wars 1, what did it have? Okay, when it was Prophecies were released, once you completed the personal story or the story, the main area that people would go to would be Sorrow's Furnace. That was the main place where you got the elite green weapons. There was also the Fissure of Woe and the Underworld, where you got obsidian shards and ectoplasm. And if you compare that to Guild Wars 2, Guild Wars 1, the only place you could get obsidian shards and ectoplasm was in those two realms. In Guild Wars 2, there are no materials that you cannot get in specific places. If you, apart from say tier 6 mats from a particular mob, you can, things like the Vicious Claw, there are no materials that you can get, say for fractals. There's no particular materials that you can only get from fractals. There's no particular materials that you can get from dungeons apart from dungeon tokens. That's the only reason you'd go and do dungeons, apart, for the gold and for the dungeon tokens. But again, it's not too challenging content. The Fissure of Woe in the Underworld at the beginning of the game was extremely challenging content. Well, it was for me anyway. I'm sure for a lot of other players it was quite easy. But yeah, I mean, the equivalent materials in Guild Wars 2, we do have the ectoplasm, we do have the obsidian shards. The obsidian shards you can mainly get just through karma. Tends to be that way. There are other ways, obviously, to get the obsidian shards, but the ascended weapons, they have the bloodstone dust and the dragonite ore and the imperial fragments. They are only available in certain places, from chests, from killing bosses, dragons, and that's probably the only thing that's restrictive. But they can be got anywhere in the world. There's not one particular place like the Fissure of Woe, like the Underworld. Admittedly, it would be hard because they were human-based realms. That was the Fissure of Woe was to do with Menzies and Balthazar. There's nothing like that can have all 5 go in there. But is that necessarily a bad thing? Can you imagine having a Char go into the realm of the Fissure of Woe? I think that would be quite cool. So after analysing all of this, what is there to do when you hit level 80? If you've done all the dungeons, you know, I've done the dungeons, I've done all the dungeons, I've done all the paths, I've got my Hobby Explorer title for Dungeon Master, I've got my Legendary, I've got a full Ascended Armour. What's next? Well, there's one aspect of Guild Wars 2 that was not in Guild Wars 1, and this is where you get the majority of players currently, and that is world versus world. To me, endgame is world versus world. It's not the typical sort of endgame type thing. It's not like raids or particularly in World of Warcraft where you have obviously, you know, that sort of thing where you have 40 people going into a dungeon. World versus world is much bigger than that. You get hundreds of people playing. So let's just clarify for those that have not played World versus World. World versus World is at the beginning of each, when you create an account, you select a world to go on. For example, my world is Tarnished Coast. It's a North American server because when I played Guild Wars 1, I always found it much easier to play with people in Guild Wars 1 on American servers. It also means that I can get access the server quite well when America are actually most of them are asleep. But I'm on Tarnished Coast, and it's one of the more densely populated servers. It's, you know, doing last season in World vs World Season 1, we actually came third in the gold tier, and you know, we weren't the best World vs World server at the time. You know, there are tier 1s and tier 2s. We were sort of above a tier 2 but just below a tier 1 server, so we were better than all the tier 2s but not as good as all the tier 1s. But we did okay, we came third. And although Tarnished Coast does, it does have a lot of role playing in it as well, and our server is a very, very friendly server, I've found. So that's the server I play on, and the servers, there are many, many other servers like Jade Quarry, Blackgate, Emery Bay, and what happens in World vs World, there's a 3-way competition on 4 maps between these servers. And I'm just going to show you some footage in the background just of me playing some World vs World and looking at like the scores and how it actually affects the PvE world, because the better your score is, the more chance you are able to harvest materials and get bonus XP from crafting. So there are actually real in-game benefits to being a good World vs World server. So what World vs World is, you have the 3-way competition. You have siege weapons, which you use supply to create and take out, you know, people's castles. You have the lords, which is obviously where you get the materials from. They're the lords of the keep and the towers. Then you defeat those champion bosses and you get materials and you get XP and karma. And you know, it is a very, very on the highly populated servers anyway, really intense battles. I'm going to show you on screen now a particular battle where we were fighting Jade Quarry and Blackgate, and we attacked Jade Quarry's keep on their map. We were close to capturing it, and then Blackgate stormed in, and properly we got absolutely wiped. And then it was Jade Quarry fighting Blackgate, and it was a really, really intense fight, and it's enjoyable. I really enjoy World vs World. There aren't too many downsides to World vs World. It is frustrating when you die, you know, I'm not gonna lie. When, you know, you're there and you're fighting, and if you can get killed, you know, if you're a character, particularly depending on what character you are, what profession you are, sorry, you can get killed very easily, especially when you know a lot of the World vs World servers that are in that tier 1, they all have mumble and they all talk on TeamSpeak. It's like the scene from the Matrix, the final Matrix movie, when you get that ball of machines spooling up and you know it's going to slam into the tower, and there's you know, your server, you're standing in a particular area and you know that all this enemy is just going to come and hammer you, and you know it's coming, and you've just got your best to dodge out of the way of it. It is, you know, it's an exciting moment to come and see, and it's a social aspect. You know, you are playing with other players. but you play with more other people on World versus World than you do anywhere else. You know, you have hundreds of people in a map at a time, and the battles you have are immense. I mean, I remember just last week we had a great a fight where 2 servers were fighting each other, and Arzerg was coming up to fight them, and instead of going head on, we split into 2 and flanked them, and we ended up wiping both of those other servers. And it's that sort of thing with the amount of loot you get as well. It's just it is an enjoyable experience as well. You know, you're contributing to your server, you know, by capturing towers and sentries. You're increasing the score, or maybe not for sentries, but you know, if you capture a keep, you increase your score for your server, and you feel, you know, you have that little bit of, or I do anyway, I have that sense of loyalty to Tarnished Coast. Here's a fun fact: I've never played on any other server apart from Tarnished Coast. I have never guested on another server. I know I should have done, but I cannot leave Tarnished Coast. So that's the experience you get in Guild Wars 2 for World versus World. Is it particularly endgame? Well, if you think about it, Guild Wars 1, you would just go for materials, and it's how you earn money. You do earn money by ranking up in World versus World. You know, you get around 25 or whatever it is silver. I'm sure that increases as you go up and up and up, and you get a couple of greens or rares, and you also get medals, Medal of Honor for you know, killing people, completing achievements, and you can spend those on siege, you can spend those on armor, and it is an enjoyable experience. But I think I'll finish on a question: is World versus World the best thing about Guild Wars 2? You know, when I started off and, you know, I read the initial reports about World versus World, I thought, that's going to be interesting, but it's not going to be the main aspect of Guild Wars 2. Having, you know, it's now April, we're talking, you know, 20 months down the line. I've completed the personal story on most of my characters. I've done all the dungeons. I got my armor on most of my characters to exotic or ascended level. I mean, I'm actually going for secondary and third armors for all these characters. But is it the best thing about Guild Wars 2? At one point, no. When Guild Wars 2's Season 1 was going on, it was much one of the prime things that was going on, and we were lots of people were there. And then it stopped. When Season 1 finished, I didn't play World vs World for 2 months. There was no motivation to, because Season 1 had ended and we were waiting for Season 2. As soon as Season 2 started, I played World vs World for at least 2 hours a day, every day. And I am loving it. It's much more enjoyable than it was in Season 1. And the spring tournament is what it's called now. I'm really enjoying this. But once I've got all the achievements, will I still be involved in this? I don't know. I think I will be. But I do think they need to make more. I think depending on how long this tournament's going to go on, I do think they need to shorten the tournament to, say, you know, like a month tournament. You know, have it like monthly achievements. Because I've been playing. This is the second week, and I'm sure other people have already got all the World versus World objectives completed already. But for someone who, you know, I've played it a fair bit, I've almost completed. I think I've completed 6 out of the 10 major objectives, and it's just for me. A lot of them, they could be a lot more harder to get. I mean, some of them are very hard and tricky to complete, but I think it can be. This can be achieved in a month. All the titles, all of the achievements for the meta for World vs World spring season. And so I just want to finish and say that my personal opinion of World vs World is that it is one of the better aspects of Guild Wars 2. It's one of the more unique things about Guild Wars 2 compared to other games. I'm sure there are other games where you could fight, you know, on a similar type of aspect of server versus server. But yeah, I really enjoy World vs World. Is it the end game for Guild Wars 2? At this stage, I'd have to say yes. I can't see any other thing that you can constantly do and it keeps changing. You know, it's not like the Fissure of Woe. It's not like the Underworld. It's not like Sorrow's Furnace. It's not. We don't have a hard mode. This is all compared to Guild Wars 1. We don't have a hard mode. There aren't books to complete like in Eye of the North that you can then turn in. What else? You know, in Guild Wars 2, in Guild Wars 1, you had achievement titles that you could go for, to do with the Sweet Tooth, to do with luck, to do with getting drunk, to do with map completion, to do with completing all the hard modes. Guild Wars 2 doesn't have any of that. It has different achievements, you know, slay all the enemies, you know, slay all the plants, slay all the giants. That's not really the same, you know, because if you slay all the bosses, all the particular creatures, you don't get a particular title. That's all it is, you get a title. There's no sort of enjoyment really for this compared to Guild Wars 1. So for me, the main aspect of when you hit level 80, once you've completed the personal story, the next stage for you to do, if you've completed the dungeons, which I'm sure most of you will have done, or at least some of or all the dungeons, they're not that enjoyable once you've completed them. World versus world is where the most fun happens. It's the social aspect. It's the thrill of trying to capture somebody else's keep, or to try and sneak in, or the immense battles that you can have. I mean, we're talking sort of, you know, big zergs of 80 to 100 people fighting each other, but not just one, not just two zergs, but then you get a third zerg come in. Admittedly, on the less populated servers this might not be the case, but on a highly densely populated server, it's very, very good fun. And I think at the moment it is one of the better things about Guild Wars 2. It's what's keeping the game going. If World vs World wasn't in game, how many people would still be playing Guild Wars 2? It's just something to think about. By all means, feel free to comment. If you disagree with me, absolutely fine. Everyone has their own opinion. But just leave comments below. Give me your thoughts. And yeah, thanks very much for your time, and hope you enjoy the next video.